Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So in a previous video, we laid out the 7 principles of becoming an AI-first company, a foundational guide for you to understand what it truly means for your business to become AI-first. But what does it really take to embed AI into your business? How do you move from theory to the tangible? Today, I have the opportunity of sitting down with a true thought leader in this space throughout all of the different business transformations over the last few decades. Someone who has years of firsthand experience of actually leading AI-first companies, including us here at Integrail, our CEO, Peter Guagenti. On today's conversation, Peter and I had the opportunity to sit down and tackle some of the greatest questions that leaders are asking today about agentic AI, as well as the future of AI and work. We started things off at a base level, like what is an AI-first company in the first place? We got into some of the nitty-gritty of actual steps that you could take in your business, talked about the contrast of just being AI-enabled versus AI-first, and Peter provided some true insight into the C-suite level or leadership level topics to talk about how you can lead these companies well while still transforming the true nature of your business. This interview is packed with practical advice, strategic insights, and a realistic look at this AI revolution. Not all doom and gloom, but not all hyper-maximalism either. So if you're ready to understand how to truly become an AI-first company, or you just want to try to understand this agentic AI and AI revolution that's happening right now, you won't want to miss any second of this. And before we get started, remember to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all things agentic AI and see more interviews just like this. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us today to kind of talk all things about becoming an AI-first company. So the first question that I have for you today is, oftentimes when we're advising, and especially when you're advising these companies and talking about Integrail and our product, it's oftentimes starting with defining what an AI-first company is, like for that individual company to really figure out their needs. So as the very first start, kind of bottom level that we're starting at here, could you please, from your definition, define AI-first company?
Okay, absolutely. But before I do that, I want to frame it in the context of another business transformation that happened already that is very similar, which was what it meant to go from being an analog business to a digital business starting 30 years ago. Because I think we're at the very beginning. We're at chapter 1 of a transformation that is going to be probably an order of magnitude bigger than that one, but will probably happen in half the time. And so this is not just another technology. This isn't like the birth of cloud or the birth of open source or one of these other things. This is a fundamental transformation in how we work and how we live. AI works like a human brain, right? Forget AGI, forget anything else that's coming. The LLMs as they exist today operate like a human brain, and the application of an LLM is like applying a knowledge worker, right? And so when we talk about being AI first, it's similar to this change we had of being a digital business, right? And putting those decisions and putting that way of thinking at the core of everything we did. It was about, the core and how we think and how we work and how we structure our teams and our products and our services and all those things. And so I didn't even start thinking about this concept of AI first until I started hearing it from my customers, actually. And, the definition that I have now in my mind after talking to my customers, but then also hearing, Mark Benioff talking about an AI workforce and hearing, Aaron Levy at Box talking about being AI first, or hearing, the CEO of Shopify saying that he's not going to hire anyone until at first he decides and assesses whether that role could be done by AI. I think it really is a fundamental reassessment, first and foremost, of your labor force. And saying, should this job be done by a human, or would this job be better served by an AI worker instead? And then looking at your products and services and saying, should this be done with deterministic software, if this, then that, the traditional way we've done it now for 25 years, or would this be better served with the LLM as the processor instead? And all of this really culminating in saying, if AI is that transformative of a capability, and really it's this now driving force of change itself, you can't assume like you have to actually stop being AI first. I think in many ways is actually being curious and assuming you don't know. like actually leading with assuming you don't know, and asking yourself, is it possible? And if it is possible, what would the benefit be?
Okay. I mean, that's wonderful. I feel like that's something that's very unique that, although maybe you even just started thinking about, the whole idea of the phrase AI first company, it's kind of a newish thing, but you have been a part of leading these teams, that are actually kind of doing that for so long by now, especially coming over to Integrail. So with kind of that idea, now that a company needs to first and foremost even think through all this digital transformation and think through strategically and look through their business, what would you say is like one actionable, like maybe the first actionable step that they kind of started thinking about all these, okay, now do this?
Yeah, I'll I'll give you I'll give you a couple things that I think that I share with every customer I talk to. The first is when you think about applying AI, ask yourself where you are dissatisfied with either your capacity or your capability, right? And by capacity, I mean, where do you feel like you are either understaffed, like there is more you should be doing or want to be doing, because usually most of us nowadays, since the economic downturn, we're now financially constrained, right? We had 13 years of boom times economically. That money dried up. It stopped, right? We had to go to capital efficiency. And so most of us feel like our backlogs or our desires or aspirations are much bigger than we have staffing for. So we're your capacity constrained. Or the flip side of that, where are you spending money on capacity that you think is not adding any value, right? Think about like contract teams or business process outsourcing, right? There's $300 billion spent on business process outsourcing, right? That's all going to Accenture and Wipro and Tata and Cognizant and all these other firms. And most people are horribly dissatisfied with what they're getting out of those firms. And so ask yourself, if I can describe a role sufficiently that I can offshore it to the Philippines, I can probably offshore it to a GPU, right? So, those two sides of the coin from a capacity perspective. Do I need more? Do I have enough? Can I get more capacity out of it? I see this, for example, in marketing teams, right? Marketing teams, 5xing or 10xing their capacity using generative AI to extend their campaign creation. I'm seeing it in HR teams extending their footprint for things like candidate screening or for, doing things like sentiment analysis and outreach because they can now have either, evaluation and analysis being done by an LLM instead of it having to be manually done by a human reading every resume, right? But they're still coaching it. It's just now they've got more eyes on it, you know, or looking at business process functions that have been outsourced. I've got customers who've had massive teams that were doing things like reading contracts to extract relevant data or reading an invoice and inputting the correct information into a financial system. Those teams are gone, right? That is now all done by LLMs instead. These are AI workers doing it instead. So those are great areas to do it. The capability side is one too I wouldn't undervalue because it's not just about efficiency, right? So we talk all the time about how AI increases both EBITDA and revenue, right? And so, the efficiency side is great, but you can actually do more with this capability as well. Like we're used to sort of do more with less. You can do more with AI, right? And so the capability side, these AI workers can do things you can't staff for, right? I think we saw this actually for the first wave with things like the AI code assistants, where you had teams that didn't really want to write software, didn't really know how to write software very well, all of a sudden actually generating software incredibly well, right? With these AI code assistants. I think we're seeing that now in creative functions. Our lean marketing team at Integrail is using, AI video generators and AI image generators and all these other things. And as a small team, that adds capacity and capability we didn't have before, right? And so that goes even beyond. We work with a wealth management firm who wanted to do deeper and more robust analysis in quarterly reporting, where they're really analyzing more information in order to identify broader market trends. So they coached an AI worker to ingest all of that information and look for those trends and output summarization. That's possible, right? That's a new capability, right? That actually makes them smarter and stronger, right? So I think those are the two areas to look at. Like think about where could you increase your capacity or increase the efficiency of that capacity, and then where could you add capability. Now, the other part of this to do, it's very easy to get very big eyes and a very big appetite when you do these things. And so the other piece of coaching I give people is crawl, walk, run. Like you don't have to boil the ocean. Like you think about, the back office data processing use case. Like if you've got, 10 people doing a function and you could go and do 90% of that, that's massive savings, right? Let's say that team is a team of 100 though, right? Well, you get a 10% savings out of that. Where else can you just find 10% of savings in an optimized business? Most people can't. Like you literally just can't, right? Especially with all the cost cutting that we've been doing over the last 5 years. So, you know, I do think this is one of those things where it's okay to start small, right? It's okay to iterate. And we believe that what you should be doing with these AI workers is delegate a task, then delegate an extension of that task through the workflow, then ultimately delegate a full function or a role as needed. And, that also, it doesn't just let you go and slowly and steadily get value from these systems. It allows you to deal with the change management of that within your own organization, right? Because right now, with 100% human workers inside of our organizations, we have this org chart of leaders and managers and individual contributors. But if you fast forward 5 to 10 years from today, there's a very real possibility all we have are human leaders and AI workers as our ICs. I don't think that's completely outside of the realm of the realistic. And so even the people who are early adopters now in AI first companies are having to wrap their head around, wow, I used to go and have a vision and a strategy and then have to go, I'll execute some of it myself and maybe delegate some portion of it. Now you delegate most of it, right? So, that change management is going to have to come over time. The technology is not the limiting factor in that. It's still the sort of human adaptation to the new process and the new way of working.
Absolutely. And I think that brings up a really interesting point of, especially with, as you're talking about, and most leaders, especially in businesses, are seeing this happen obviously in real time. And most people are like, we talk about it all the time of like most big enterprises or even just companies are maybe like 2 or 3 years behind of like, oh, let me just, here's now my company chatbot. Here it is, like which happened years ago. But then it has the idea of, okay, well now I'm seeing, agentic AI coming up. We're seeing Integrail talking about AI workers. We're seeing this becoming a bigger trend. How do you talk to maybe these companies and enterprises about the idea of making sure that they don't just become AI enabled, where like, okay, yeah, now you have a few of these random AI products more or less, and how do you then walk them to becoming more or less an AI first company?
That's a really great question. And I wouldn't want to downplay the value of being AI enabled, because even the simple chatbots, the adoption of chatbots within most organizations is still incredibly low, right? I think most people, I don't know what the actual adoption rate of something like ChatGPT is, but it's not 100% penetration of corporate America. Like, so, there is massive opportunity already. And the AI assistant and I mean that as a category. I don't just mean GPT, right? Because there are highly specialized assistants. There's corporate chatbots that know very specific corporate knowledge or assigned to very specific tasks. Like at Integrail, we help customers build highly focused AI workers that are just chatbots that know a topic. Think like sales enablement or HR policy and benefits, or partner onboarding and enablement for software companies. It's another one that we've built in the past. So those things are actually highly valuable because there's usually, one or two or many people who are accountable for answering those questions. So there's this massive productivity savings on one side. And then the people who are asking those questions many times are constrained in that sometimes they ask the question, sometimes they don't because they feel stupid, right? Or they feel like they're supposed to know it, or, they don't know how to ask the question very well. And so they may not actually get the answer they want if they didn't get exactly what they wanted. Whereas with an AI assistant, they'll persist, right? Just like you do multiple searches, like we learned with Google over the years, you'll do multiple interactions with the chatbot. And so even the chat use cases are like 20, 30, 50% productivity gain, right? For the people who are using them, right? You think about customer support, like just having an internal chat assistant for customer support when a ticket comes in has seen dramatic decreases in mean time to resolution on tickets, right? So I wouldn't want to poo-poo these, like, you know, I'd call them sort of the AI fundamentals, like these sort of initial applications of AI. They are really powerful. But at the end of the day, you cannot be looking at AI and saying, well, I ticked the box, I did the first step, right? And you have to actually look at utilization, right? You have to actually make sure that people are actually using these things, because there is a change management portion. But what you should also be doing with these early usage of these tools, like the chat assistants, or what we see a lot are these sort of what we call tactical agents, like an AI agent that is off the shelf. It does a very specific task in a very specific way. It's not tunable or modifiable or custom to my organization like what you build on the Integrail platform, but they're usually great. Like they do 80% of the task that you want, or they do it 80% of the way that your company cares about. Those are wonderful. Use those because they teach you, right? And they help you understand what do you benefit from? What else would you do? Where else would you want to apply that kind of technology? What else would you do even within that one AI worker? But I think we have to think about this as a capability maturity model and a capability maturity cycle that we're going through, right? I lived through digital transformation starting in 95, right? If we stopped at what the web looked like in 97, or we stopped at what the web looked like in 2001 when broadband first came out, where would we be, right? And there are companies who did that. I remember experiencing this with these businesses who were like, oh, I have a website now, so I'm good, right? Or I have a mobile app now, I'm good, right? I'll tell you, those companies didn't make it, right? I won't name names, but like I sat in boardrooms, I sat in the C-suite in those companies and saw them hitting the wall and seeing they didn't have much of a future, right? And I think if you really care about your business, you care about what you're able to achieve, then you have to think about these things as stepping stones and milestones in your own evolution and adoption of AI and who you are and how you work.
That's a phenomenal point. Absolutely. And that immediately makes me think of, so especially with, the whole idea, we've talked about it multiple times, the iterative approach, but also, being agile through it all. And most people are kind of used to that thought process, I feel like. So learning that and implementing that into their business actually should feel, more or less, they should be used to that a little bit, at least a little bit in some capacity. Now, let's say, okay, we're a company that has been thinking about these things. Maybe we've started iterating. We've started with the AI enablement to then we want to move on, to truly become AI first. From an investment standpoint, where do you think the best first place to start spending their actual capital and allocating that to go becoming AI first? Like, where would you start with that?
So I don't know if there is a great first place to spend the money, but I can tell you where you shouldn't, right? Which is, I think the first wave of this, everyone felt like they needed to go and make massive infrastructure investments. And I think that was a huge mistake. They were told that, the way to adopt AI was going to be to go build some massive data warehouse and to aggregate all of their corporate knowledge and all of their corporate data in one place. And that was a complete waste of time, right? If you actually look at how we use LLMs nowadays, the LLMs and these AI workers talk directly to the systems that hold that data, right? And actually, the data that we tend to now curate and collate is not even in a data warehouse, right? It tends to be more in vector databases or in graph databases, because like we want an enterprise knowledge graph. So we actually aggregate in a totally different form factor than these people were told to do. And so unless the data is completely inaccessible in another system, which is a possibility, right? I mean, especially when you talk about large corporations, sometimes data just doesn't reside in a way that makes it very easy for a system to work with. A human can access it, but a system can't work with it. We are talking about this is now, we had software as a service for years. Now this is services as software, right? So these are now software beings going and navigating across these things. You do need to make it accessible, but I don't think you need to like boil the ocean with some large infrastructure project to be able to do it. Even on the GPU side, right? We had these massive infrastructure build outs, buying up GPUs and buying all these things. Like, you can rent this stuff. Like, you don't have to do that. And, I am a big believer in private AI and having control over your own infrastructure and control over your corporate data, right? This is the keys to the kingdom most of the time we're talking about. So you don't want, some other company exfiltrating your most proprietary information. But, there are methods to solve for this. And so that's, I think, an anti-pattern, right? Is setting some 12-month journey to go and build some massive infrastructure project. That just sounds more like a way for IT to burn capital, right? That doesn't seem like it adds a bunch of value. I'm a big believer in flipping it on its head and saying, no, pick specific practical use cases and build backwards from the use case, right? And by the way, the digital transformation example actually applies now that I say that out loud. Do you know who made the most money during the dot-com boom? Sun Microsystems, right? That's who made the most money, because all the dot-coms, they raised all this money, they built massive data centers and massive server farms, right? And they burned through all their capital before they ever had applications live, right? We're kind of doing the same thing with AI, right? And so I think that's an anti-pattern. Like, go and work backwards from your customer. If you're a product person, go work backwards from the role if you're an operations person, right? And focus on that. The other thing I would say, if you want to be AI first from an investments perspective, is I really believe this is a C-suite discussion. It does not get delegated down, right? It has to be at that level. And you cannot just put it on IT or go and say, well, we're going to experiment in this one division. Everyone has to go at once, right? You have to look in each function and say, okay, IT and engineering, what are you doing with AI? And actually, that's the most advanced category, right? Because the LLMs were good at writing code and reading code before they were good at English, right? So, that's a great category. But then human resources, what are you doing? Marketing and sales, what are you doing? Operations, logistics, what are you doing? Finance, what are you doing? By the way, the finance use cases are probably almost as advanced as the customer support or engineering use cases nowadays, because numbers are numbers, right? And so I think that's really key. So if you can work at each one of your functions and say, what are those specific capabilities that we can deploy immediately? What are those crawl capabilities? Let's go and build those, right? Let's get them to production, right? They're not experiments. Let's get them to production and then iterate from there. I think that so far is proving to be a much more provable and repeatable pattern than a lot of the other things that people have done.
And that is, I almost feel like it's almost like a joke, and at least in the AI space right now, of the idea of like pilot purgatory of sorts, where like you hear of these especially large corporations, where I've experienced it firsthand, of the idea of, okay, let's start this pilot, and then 6 months later, what happens to the pilot? Usually nothing, and they just wasted millions of dollars. Usually, from a leadership perspective, maybe to the other leaders out there that are maybe in that kind of place where they can see that happening, what do you think would be like your advice to specifically kind of the C-suite leaders to make sure that they don't fall into that pilot purgatory?
So, I mean, my advice is ship it. Like, ship it as soon as it's as good as it would have been with something else. I mean, I see this all the time, and I see it in pilots that I'm doing, right? Where we pilot things with customers all the time, and I see them being evaluated to a degree that the humans aren't evaluated to, right? And I'm not surprised, because it's a new capability and we don't understand it. And so, the change management portion is bigger than the technical portion. And so we see it with autonomous cars. I mean, there's a great example of this, right? So I live in the Bay Area. San Francisco has Waymos everywhere, like truly everywhere. You see more Waymos now on the road than you see like normal cars in San Francisco. And those Waymos, they've been driving them for a while now. they have a provable record, right? And their accident rate is a fraction of the human accident rate in San Francisco. And the accident rate that they have is overwhelmingly caused by human drivers hitting them, right? And however, if you actually survey most people, whether they feel more comfortable in an Uber or a Waymo, which one do you think they'll choose, right? And I think the same thing is happening with many of these AI pilots. Like, I think there are many that are failing. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. I think there's a lot of stuff where we're not getting them to the finish line. There's a lot of overdevelopment happening. There's a lot of sort of strange things happening and turning them into massive boondoggles. I think I've seen quite a bit of that already, particularly where there's like ground up infrastructure, ground up engineering to go and build AI, massive AI applications. That's happening. But I think the resistance I'm seeing many times at the sort of last mile is where something is really good and really quite good, but all of a sudden it's being measured to a degree that if it had been done with deterministic software and humans in the loop, you already would have shipped it, right? You would have been totally happy with it. And so I think it's on executives to be like truly like objective when you look at these things and say, okay, before I even start one of these projects, what does success look like? Right? What does success look like? Where do I see this as something that is complete and I'm comfortable and happy with it, And then when you get there, ship it, get it out, learn from it, make sure that your team absorbs and adopts it, and then start iterating from there. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? It's more important to get it out and learn from it and improve from there.
Yep, absolutely. And then you already kind of touched on the next point from a leadership perspective, especially what we're seeing for, there's the doomers and then there's the hypers for when it comes down to AI and especially, agentic AI. What would you say now to leaders once again for the teams? How can they actually talk to their team members and their employees about implementing these AI systems and also like creating trust with their employees throughout all this when all they're hearing is, oh, they're going to take your job, like, or it's the Terminator's coming. Like, how would you handle that?
Look, I'm in the middle, right? I'm pragmatic, right? And I've prided myself over my career in trying to be realistic about what's happening. And I think I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about how AI basically is going to end humanity by 2035. And I was listening to the logical leaps they were making. And as somebody who really understands the technology incredibly well and has been working in AI for 8 years or whatever it is, and I was like, this is utter nonsense. Like, I could not believe that there was somebody who is, worked inside of Google DeepMind saying some of the things that they were saying. And then the other side, when I hear Mark Andreessen talking about, all the sunshine and roses and unicorns that are going to come from AI, I think that's also completely unrealistic as well. Like, this is a transformative technology. It is going to drop a bomb in the middle of everything we do and how we work. It will. However, you cannot put the genie back in the bottle. The technology is already out. We are not going to shut it off. And even if we were to maybe go through with the legislation, for example, in the United States and say, okay, we're going to shut off AI and we're not going to do it in the United States, do you think anyone else in the world is going to stop? Right? So I think the reality is the technology is already out. Like, I think we had this, we had these things happen to us in the past before. We had the same exact ask of ourselves when we developed the atom bomb, right? And nuclear energy, right? We had that same thing. We had to figure it out. Like, we had to just figure out what it meant. And so, I think the reality is this thing is going to be disruptive. And the question for us as leaders is, do we make this a force of good or a force, a positive force for change or a negative force for change? And I think that's a very personal thing that, us as individuals need to absorb and really think about what that means. But then us as leaders also need to embrace that our people are going to be scared, right? Even if it was overwhelmingly perceived as a positive force of change, humans really suck at change. That is the one thing we're really bad at. right? Our brains are wired for patterns and repeatability. Like we don't like change. And so, I think we just need to, at the very minimum, embrace the fact that people are going to be scared based on how much disruption there is. And so my guidance is, don't just talk about the technology and talk about, what did that immediate change is, but talk about the long-term implications, talk about the positive benefit, right? Because I do think, knowing the technology well, I disagree with this view. I don't, I'll say it right out. I don't believe AGI will ever come. I don't think this technology is AGI, right? Maybe we get it eventually, but I don't think the LLMs will become AGI. That's probably a whole other separate live stream for you and I going into that. But, I think what we have is an incredibly fast processor, right? We have an incredibly fast pattern matching brain, and it's really good at that. And it's amazing at some things that the human brain is not amazing at the pace that it can work at. What it is not amazing at are things like, true creativity. And I don't mean creating things. I mean doing things that don't fit the pattern, right? True creativity. I also don't think the LLMs are ever anything other than what we direct them at, right? And so true vision and strategy and direction is something that still has to come from us as humans. And so, I think what that means for us as human workers in the face of a rise of AI workers is, we all must think of ourselves as leaders. We must all think of ourselves as becoming leaders, and our jobs change. I don't sit down at my laptop and, write. If you're a marketer, for example, for you, Austin, I don't sit there and just write blogs and write social copy. And, I don't sit there and just write 100 pieces of marketing, pieces that end up in various channels. Now I write messaging guides, right? And I write positioning statements. And then I feed that to an AI worker who then generates all of those things, right? That's what a manager does, by the way. That's what a good, that's what a good exec copywriter in an ad firm would have done, right? That's what a good chief marketing officer does, right? And so that's the kind of thing we have to start wrapping our head around, is as the human, we are now going to up level. The other thing I'll say for those who are concerned about this is, with every innovation we've ever had, we've actually not destroyed jobs. We've created jobs every single time. So like when spreadsheets occurred, and this was, I'm not going to take credit for this. This was the folks at Section AI, the training guys, highlighted this in some of their recent training. When spreadsheets occurred, everyone was like, this is the death of accounting jobs, right? We'll never need this. Yes, bookkeeping jobs tanked, right? Bookkeeping jobs completely went away, right? However, all of a sudden, a whole new class of jobs emerged around true analysis and forward planning. Like FP&A jobs exploded, right? And where we resulted 10 years before bookkeeping to 10 years after the spreadsheet was the job actually went up, right? Digital transformation was another one. Like when the web first emerged, everyone was like, this is it. Like this is the end of the economy. Instead, GDP grew consistently for that entire time. And if you go and you talk to Deloitte and Goldman Sachs and the economists, they say actually they believe that US GDP grew so consistently from 2000 through 2020 because of digital transformation, that if it wasn't for that, GDP would not have grown just as aggressively. And so I am realistic, but I do think that if we take action as leaders to help people understand the change that is coming and what that means for them, and then create opportunities for them in that, I think we build stronger businesses, and ultimately they have better lives on the other end of it.
Absolutely, man. That was wonderful. Now, with just for the sake of your time, Peter, here, I have one last question for you, and this is kind of an abstract question. If there's anything that we have not covered today on, becoming an AI first company, or even just, the AI landscape as a whole, is there anything else that you think is of utmost importance for people to know about going forward? Whether, like I said, through AI first company or just what you're seeing coming in the marketplace?
I think maybe is slightly self-serving. So take what I say with a grain of salt if you choose. But I think the way we buy AI needs to shift a little bit, because I think we spent the last 15 years buying SaaS tools and buying individual services. And it was very much like I just need that one tool that does that one thing. And it was hyper competitive, and we were really trying to keep things tight. And we knew how to buy things really well, and we knew exactly what we needed. And we sort of had this really rigorous process. And then we got really good at the evaluation process. And I feel like people are trying to carry what the vendor evaluation and selection process, and ultimately then the integration process into their business look like into AI. And the reality is it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work because AI is not another piece of software. It's not like you're buying a CRM, right? Or buying an ERP tool before that, or buying, your new financial planning software, right? That's not what it is. It is all of those things, and also all of the staff who does all of those things. That's what you're actually evaluating. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's really true. Like when we talk about services as software, not software as it's really true. Like when you look at these tools, you're looking at hiring not HubSpot, but the SDR and the sales ops person and the team offshore who does all your lead enrichment. You're not looking at, a tool like Anaplan that does FP&A. You're actually looking at the planner. That's what you're buying, is the planner who does it, right? You're not buying the new accounting platform. You're buying the AP team, right? So, and it is that wide, right? When you talk about a platform like Integrail, like we've got stuff that's being done for wealth management firms that replace the Stanford grads, and then I've got back office teams doing data processing, and then I've got product stuff happening in software companies, and so it's really wide and deep, right? And so my coaching to executive teams is, first and foremost, if you are looking at tools and it solves a real world problem immediately, buy it. Buy it. If you think you're going to get immediate value, time to value is everything right now, right? And I'm not alone saying this. Gartner did a great study on this, where they're talking about tactical AI versus strategic AI, and immediate time to value versus building platforms and long-term projects. And they agree with me 100%, which is, there's so much potential in the technology as it stands today, that if you see something that feels like it's going to have a positive and beneficial impact on your business immediately, grab it. Because it's not just about the impact on the business, also you are learning, you are building the capability. This is a new muscle for you. It's a new way of working. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second is, there isn't a one tool. There just isn't. Like, this is going to be a whole new class of tooling and capabilities in the business. Just like we went from, mainframe to client server to web applications to SaaS, like all of that stuff, or much of that stuff, will probably get wiped out by agentic AI. Most of it, right? Why do you think Andreessen Horowitz and all these guys aren't investing in SaaS tools anymore? They're not investing in anything really other than core infrastructure and AI agents. That's it. So, I don't think that you have to have this sort of perfect evaluation process and find the one perfect tool to rule them all. It's just not going to happen, right? So, I think you give yourself a little bit more grace, right? Give yourself a little bit more flexibility. And, the last thing I'll say along that around selection is, all of it right now, right? It all feels like, well, what's going to win and what's going to be the right answer 10 years from now? Who knows? Like, we don't know, right? Netscape was one of the most valuable technology companies in the world in 1999, right? Where are they today, right? Other than, having made Mark Andreessen rich, right? So the reality is, we don't know what the next 5 to 10 years hold. So some of the decisions you make, right? I learned a long time ago in business and in technology, everything temporary is permanent and everything permanent is temporary. So, like, you may make decisions today that ultimately change in the future. I will tell you though, it's all important. The experience and going through it all right now, it's all important. So don't be afraid of it.
So there you have it. That was our conversation with Integrail CEO Peter Guagenti. If you found this video insightful and helpful for you and your business, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And more importantly, if you are a company or someone that works at a company that is actively trying to become an AI-first business, you can head over to integrail.ai to book a demo with us. Here we can show you fully customizable AI agents, or as we call them, AI workers, that you can start integrating into your business to fully transform the way that you all do work. Make sure to stay tuned to future videos, and we'll see you next time.